1,000 square feet.
Good afternoon and welcome to the special work session of the Community Development Committee. I'd like to ask for a roll call and then we'll get into it.
Sean Anderson.
Present.
Jerry Van Someren.
Present.
Scott Counter.
Present.
Dan Hansen.
Present.
Ryan Shirley.
Ryan and I talked today. He said he'd be a little bit late. So, we have anybody from the public? We have one person here, and Kim, would you like to say anything?
Oh, I'm just saying, I'll be here to listen.
Real good. So we'll head right into the business items, Chapter 15, and I'd just like to say a couple of things about the way we structure this work session. It's meant to be for conversation, so if you have anything to say or add or throw in, your opinion means a great deal to the staff and to each other based on everything that I've gathered from talking to all of you, and that's what this work session is for. There will be no voting on any of these items, even though they're listed as business items. If we have guidance for the staff, we're going to ask them to prepare a voting agenda item for the next committee meeting. So if we come up with something that we'd like to see changed, that's how we'll handle that. That's that, and having said that, I would ask John to lead us into the first agenda item, which is Chapter 15 Zoning Ordinance Update. Take her by the numbers. Thanks, John.
Good afternoon, committee members. A little bit of background on how we got to today's work session. As you recall, September 15th, we had the formal public hearing to consider zoning amendment changes to Chapter 15. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the committee tabled any decisions so that we could conduct this study session to go into more detail about several items. I'll just cover those real quickly. Some of them were more questions about zoning and indoor air quality standards, the cooperative boundary plan and how county zoning interacts with that plan between Star Prairie and New Richmond, talking about accessory building limitations, decommissioning requirements for the solar and wind energy systems, and then skiing facility standards. And then we did get a couple more additional comments from committee members that are included in your packet. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you just want to have, just introduce, I can spend 15, 20 seconds introducing the topic, and then the committee can discuss the relevant issues, if that's okay? Okay. First question that was brought up at the last meeting, does or can city or county zoning regulate indoor air quality standards? We reached out to Public Health about this question, and we were informed that St. Croix Public Health reviews indoor air quality standard issues through Chapter 42 of the County Code. And within that Chapter 42, they identify what they define as health and human hazards. And specifically, noxious odors, air quality standards do fall under that provision. So in the past, they have had issues come up, the Department of Public Health, and depending on the issue, they either consult with the town building official, if it's mechanically having to do with equipment or anything regulated by building code. If it involves employees and impacts on employees, they get OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, involved. But that is the extent to what the county has in the current code. We do not really see indoor air quality standards being a zoning issue as it is so much a public health issue. So we just wanted to recap that to let you know we did reach out to Public Health to pose that question.
Any thoughts? We're Jerry, Scott.
So with that, I know I've done a considerable amount of research on it, and OSHA does have a set standard. And those are things that we'll have to work with county health. But unfortunately, they don't have a standard for different age categories and those types of things. So once you get down to youth and that, they have nothing. Unfortunately, though, they use the OSHA guidelines for maximum particulate levels for carbon monoxide and everything as their go-to standard for everything. So that there's going to be several obstacles into trying to deal with something. So I think it's something that we do need to address with, first off, just talk about and have discussions with the Health and Human Services, and then possibly work that towards a recommendation to go to the state.
Right, we just won't be able to deal with that through this committee or this department. So, thank you for looking into that, John.
Thank you.
And let's take the next item.
The next item deals with a question that was raised about county zoning and why county zoning is being used within an area under a cooperation boundary or a cooperative boundary between the city of New Richmond and the town of Star Prairie. That agreement was executed in 2012, so it's been in effect for about 10 years. And generally, you can see the areas I X'd out on your map in your packet and on the overhead. Generally, it's areas west of the city of New Richmond and then north. And when we checked the agreement, and we also followed up with city staff at the city of New Richmond on this, but really it comes down to the agreement stating that city zoning cannot go into effect until there's a specific zoning ordinance for what they call the urban reserve area, or these areas in black. So even though they're under the cooperative boundary jurisdiction, because the city zoning ordinance has not been enacted for that area, the default is the county zoning ordinance. So until the city adopts a zoning ordinance specifically for the urban reserve area, the county zoning ordinance still supersedes, and that is the case today. It was indicated by city staff that they do anticipate getting a study committee or a group together to start looking at that zoning ordinance. So as of now, the county zoning still applies in those areas. So that was just more of a clarification.
I thought that was pretty interesting. Any questions? Sean?
I mean, then that sounds like it'd be pretty automatic that we would amend our zoning to get rid of those sections if and when the city does something about it.
Right, so I think by virtue of the agreement and the authority and statute under 66, I can't read, 0307, I think once the city adopts a zoning ordinance and it's in effect, we will change our zoning map once we get notified from the city of New Richmond.
I don't think it will even take action by this board. It will just be, we update our maps. I got you. That's all. They would just send us a letter, sort of a copy of their ordinance, so we'd have something to refer people to as a courtesy, since they're used to coming to us, and we change our maps.
Very good. Any other thoughts, or does it dispatch this idea? Real good. Moving on, number 3. Accessory buildings. This will be a little bigger conversation.
So as the committee recalls, we had some pretty detailed discussions on this issue. So under the current ordinance that I'm highlighting here right now, the prohibition on accessory structures applies to major subdivisions only. And this is the provision that deals with accessory buildings being allowed to be built before the principal dwelling structure. And again, we define a major subdivision as a CSM or plat in excess of 5 or more lots. Through some of our research and taking a look at some of the comments and concerns we've been getting from the towns, the draft code that we were discussing the other night takes the accessory structure, chapter 15.305, and would prohibit accessory buildings in the R2 and R3 zoning districts. So we're going a little bit above and beyond the major subdivision restriction and expanding that to the R2 districts. And if you recall, we had a zoning map and we kind of showed you what the R2 areas were. The R2 areas primarily large portions of the towns on the west side of the county, also Kinnikinnick, Richmond, portions of Star Prairie, and then Somerset. Those are all areas that are currently zoned R2. You know, we talked a little bit about some issues at the last meeting about reasons for prohibiting in major subdivisions. Obviously, closer proximity to other residential dwellings. We've had some concerns and complaints about the upkeep of these buildings, weeds, maintenance, impacts of property values. And then once these accessory dwellings are filled, they begin storing stuff on the outside of the structure. On the flip side of that, by limiting it and prohibiting it in the R2 district, we are including large expanses of areas that we quite frankly don't see being developed with major subdivisions for some time. And again, I go back to this map. Some of the towns that chose to be under R2 zoning, but really, don't have high demand for major subdivisions yet would be Kinnikinnick, portions of O'Galley. Over half of O'Galley is zoned R2, but again, primarily the eastern towns. So that kind of explains both sides of the issues. We did give you some options to consider for discussion today. We can obviously leave the current code as is, leaving the prohibition in major subdivisions. Leave the code as is, prohibit in major subdivisions, but require principal setbacks as an option. You can certainly adopt what's being proposed. I guess another option would be to remove any limitations altogether. So kind of a little bit of a recap on what we talked about at the last meeting, and I guess we can open it up for any comments or discussions or questions that we could help answer. And Mike Wozniak joined us. Mike is the zoning administrator, and Mike might be able to lend a little bit more perspective too on maybe some of the issues that we hear from residents or concerns on matters such as this.
What do you hear from people out in the townships?
Well, pardon me. We certainly get requests to construct buildings, even in the major subdivisions. Folks don't always realize that it's restricted. Some of the challenges we seem to have, though, are situations where someone wants to conduct some kind of business use, like a contractor yard, and have a building, or they don't have the dwelling and they wouldn't qualify for a home-based business if they had a dwelling. If they would build a building but they didn't have the dwelling, I should say. And so those are the kinds of things that come up. I'll just share with you, though, a little perspective. Those of you who do not know, I worked for Goodhue County, Minnesota for 14 years prior to coming over here. And Goodhue County, probably 70% of the county is in a couple different agriculture districts. And in the ag districts over there, and they have one residential district. And in that residential district, mainly it's subdivisions and probably what we would call major subdivisions that occur. Not that many of them, but that's what they get. So in the ag zones, we would typically allow accessory buildings or buildings that the assumption was that they're using it for something that a principal use of the property would be allowed. For example, we had a lot of properties that were hunting properties. They might build a building related to storing equipment they used to maintain the property. They might use the property for recreational use and have ATVs or snow machines or something like that. Those sorts of things would be allowed. We did not allow accessory buildings in the residential zone, but again, typically it was subdivisions, and it was a lot like our restriction in major subdivisions that we've had here in the county. So I'd say in many respects it was comparable. Of course, in the ag zones, you could also have somebody who doesn't have a dwelling on the property build a building for ag use as well, of course. And we certainly have that here in St. Croix County. It can be odd if you have a subdivision with lots side by side, somebody puts a building without a house, you have houses on either side. Aesthetically, it may be down to opinion, but it can look odd. It also is, well, how's it going to be used? Is it just to store stuff? Is it going to be used for some other reason that may come in conflict with the zoning? There isn't a total right or wrong with this. It's comes down to a degree on preference and what our public wants, as best as we can determine. I can't say that since I've been here in 2020 that we've had a lot of issues arise where we've allowed the accessory buildings in the minor subdivisions. Occasionally, though, it depends what town, and some of the towns, as John had alluded to, do bring up issues and have more concerns about it. Most of them don't.
And the challenge is, you know, we have the more developing towns, and then we have the more rural towns on the east side of the county, and we try and come up with a zoning ordinance that tries to balance that. So it's sometimes a challenge when you have different philosophies and different growth rates of towns and trying to find the right fit.
Which is why we have 3 R districts. Maybe, John, you could just refresh for our newer members, refresh their memory on what the difference is between R1, R2, and R3 in terms of major subdivisions or not allowing major subdivisions.
Sure. So the cream-colored districts on the east side of the county, Katy, Springfield, Glenwood, Emerald, they're primarily zoned R1. And from a residential dwelling perspective, R1 is limited to 1 dwelling unit per 10 acres of density. So if you have a 40-acre parcel, you're eligible for 4 lots, and then the minimum lot size is 1.5 acres. You get into the R2 areas, which is primarily the western portion of the county. R2 does not have any density limitations. R2 allows 1.5 acre lot minimums or more restrictive depending if the town has more restrictive lot sizes in their land division code. In the R1 district, going back to the R1, major subdivisions are not allowed. So we only allow certified survey maps of 4 lots or less. A little bit different in the R2 district, major subdivisions are allowed, and again, no density limit, 1.5 acre lot minimums. And then we do have an R3 district, which is very, very limited. And we do have 1 or 2 R3 districts, but they're limited in location to where there's some community sewer systems, like up in the hamlet of Emerald. You know, if there is some capacity in those systems, we would allow a little bit more density, such as duplexes and things of that nature, where they wouldn't be on a private individual system. So that explains the 3 different residential zoning categories.
Is there a definition for major subdivision? What's the parameter for major?
And a major subdivision would be a CSM or plat for 5 lots or more.
One situation that arises from time to time is somebody is planning to build a house. They want to build an accessory building to store stuff, materials, equipment while the house is being built. And it's a sort of a chicken before the egg kind of scenario. In past positions where I've had building code authority, we've handled it. If you take out the building permits simultaneously and you want to build the accessory building first, that's fine. But otherwise, if the district required that home is built before the accessory structure, then you're subject to that. But that question will arise from time to time with folks who may be involved with the project, may be contributing to the labor or serving as a general contractor for their own home.
If I could ask you a couple of questions. First of all, how often in a year do these things come up about wanting to build a building, a shed, a garage, or whatever, without having a major structure?
It hasn't come up very often in my 2.5 years since I've been with the county since March of 2020. Very infrequently.
If that's the case, would it not be in the best interest of everyone then just to keep things as they are and not put those restrictions on it? If that's not a big issue, And if one township says, well, we don't like the looks of that garage because he built it in the wrong place, maybe when you get the building permit, there should be restrictions on where it's built rather than if it's built. I just see a number of people who are running out of space in their homes and in their garages and would like to buy a piece of land, have bought a piece of land sometime, put a shed up, and maybe someday they build out there, but at least that's there. They make no plans when they build and put that there. And would that not be comfortable?
That's what you just said, loosening it up a little bit, is what we're proposing. That's what the changes would do, is loosen it up a little bit. Not leaving it as it is would keep it, would not offer as many exceptions. So our proposed red line up, John, if you can focus it, on the bottom half, that would loosen it up. That's the impact of that.
Right.
A little bit like you just described, not exactly, but it says an accessory building like B may be constructed in the R1 prior to a principal dwelling. And but the difference is that they just simply have to put it a little further back, which with the slightly bigger 1.5 acre lot sizes shouldn't be a problem. And the difference is a 15-foot side yard versus 5-foot for an accessory structure.
Right, and I think those propositions are, well, easy to live within. It's just when you would say, no, you can't do that. That's
Right.
when it's not, that's when the issue is. Can't remember what I was going to say. I'll come back to it.
Okay, well, and the only thing I was going to finish is that C up there says, it takes off just the absolute rule line about majors and says instead that either a residential building is there or under construction, which we could probably interpret it to be, go ahead and put the garage up because you've already got the bulldozer out there starting the basement and now you bring in your materials to build your house. There could probably, I'm pretty sure that's how Mike would interpret it.
I think so.
So both of those are trying to loosen it up for exactly as you just suggested. I would just add that we did have, the reason this exists at all, rather than the last option John identified, which is remove it completely, is because we did have a problem with people building the accessory structure, a garage, and then times got a little tough and they started living in their garages. It's not so much that we don't want people to have an extra bathroom in their home occupation or even in their garage. It's the whole concept of living in that when it's not built to standards that are appropriate for residential occupation. That's what happened, and we didn't have a problem in that until our old ordinance, we stopped structures from being built and just ending up sitting there for a long, long time and people moving garages.
Yep.
basically,
I
or
understand.
sheds.
And I thought of what I wanted to ask. So that's an R1 district, so that has to be, a person has to purchase 10 acres in order to put that shed up, is that correct?
There may be some lots, no, there are lots in the R1 district that are less than 10 acres. The 10-acre standard is just for new development. So in the R1 areas, we do have lots that are under 10 acres.
And it's a density, not a lot size.
Right.
If you have 40 acres, you could get four lots, but they don't each have to be 10 acres.
Take it all 3.4 and 1.5.
Yeah.
Just one comment, or a couple comments. In the R2 and R3 districts for the towns and villages, could they not have rules and regulations that are more strict than what we have that would take care of that if they were really worried about the situation?
That would be a zoning ordinance issue because you're regulating the placement of a structure and, they've deferred to the county for county zoning. So I really have a hard time seeing them adopting a separate code to regulate that.
And then my other comment was with major subdivisions, what I'm envisioning a major subdivision, a lot of them would or could have covenances that would regulate that as well. So, I mean, if we're hearing issues across the county with major subdivisions, with people not building and them having issues with that, then maybe they should have come up with a covenants in their major subdivision before they started.
And that's exactly right. But as you also know, and we hear this, it takes the other residents in the major subdivision to enforce the covenants. And there are many, many subdivisions out there that no one enforces the covenants. You know, so that's what we also hear sometimes. Just depends on where and who and what the circumstances are.
How does this affect agricultural use? This is still agricultural property. If somebody has a small holding and they put out a chicken coop and a small barn, this isn't a large operation. Suppose they're doing organic farming and they're raising goats, they're raising small animals. They don't need big buildings, but they don't live there. Suppose they live in town. These are accessory buildings, but they're not garages, they're not buildings they could live in, they're not hunting shacks. They're agricultural buildings, and they have a building they put their tractor in.
Right. And under our zoning code, we have a use table. And in our use table, we do allow a fair number of agricultural uses. So if the agricultural use is related to the business and money-making portion of the farm, we would allow that.
The way we would have looked at it in the past is that the ag use is the principal use. If you don't have, not every property, the principal use is the residential use. So we always used to look at it as, if it's ag use is the only use on there, chickens, horses, pigs, whatever, that's your principal use.
It comes down to the zoning.
Yeah.
The residential districts is what this code would regulate, depending on the extent that you want to go with it.
If we had, if you were in an R2 district in Silen, and I'm going to buy 40 acres and it's my dream area for hunting, and decide I want to put up a pole building on my 40 acres that's zoned R2, and I'm going to store my camper in there, and I got a small little hobby tractor for a food plot, and the majority of the land is, it's not agricultural, because the majority of the land is, we'll say, in trees or whatever it is. Under this pretense, I can't do that. Is that correct?
If it's related to a farm use, and
We'll say it's not a farm use. I'm just going to store my camper there, and we'll just take that completely out.
You own the site, you're not engaged you're not engaged in farming, you own the property.
I don't see why he couldn't, because if there's no house there, the principal use is he can have a different principal use. You would simply have to, that structure that stored all your stuff has to meet principal setbacks. That's the big key, that's the big change here. In B, you can build that structure if it meets principal building setbacks.
But wasn't that for the R1? I'm talking about R2.
Okay.
Cylon, the majority of Cylon's in R2.
No,
So-
majority of Cylon's in ag.
Okay, well, I'm.
Whoops.
Are you
I'm
thinking
talking
Star
about the part
Prairie?
That was yellow. We'll go down to that southern, the second township in from the southeast corner.
O'Galley, you could say it's mostly R2.
O'Galley, okay.
that's a good.
So we'll use O'Galley. I used the wrong name, sorry.
Would you like to add for B that, for R1 and R2? I mean, if you do, then at that point, yeah, then it kind of conflicts. That would conflict, would have to be one or the other. Yeah.
You know,
I don't know
I'm
what
in
you wanna do.
agreement with when you have small lots that are in a high density, we do need to look at that stuff, definitely. And for the most part, I don't know of too many of the eastern townships that don't have restrictive covenants, generally right up front to protect for this stuff. But it happens, and we need to, you know, and it's something we do need to consider. My concern is though overreaching when you get into some of these other areas where it becomes a real burden. Because now all of a sudden, well, geez, I wanted to do this. Now I have to go through rezoning and I have to look at doing a different kind of zoning or a different way to try to get around this and spend a tremendous amount of money to be able to put up my shed. In something that it shouldn't be this difficult. And that's what my concern is. I want to make this is so that the people where it makes sense to be able to do those types of things, they can. And the areas it doesn't make sense, that's where we need to consider this. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
So in R2 and R3 specifically, like something like lots over 10 acres can be considered R1 for the purpose of this part of the, you do something where lots over 10 acres are considered the same as lots that are in R1.
But if you have the situation where we'll say you have the farm and the guy right next to the farm, the farmer is willing to sell 2 acres to a guy to put up a building for his camper. But the whole surrounding area is all farm and it's part of a 40-acre parcel. So
A possible compromise that might be a little simpler would be to keep B, that accessory buildings can be constructed in R1, and then at this point, what I'm going to suggest, you could say R1 or R2, as long as they meet principal setbacks. And then, but then say, no accessory building may be constructed, and take off the R2, R3, and just say, in any major subdivision, unless a residential building is under construction or is already constructed. That would loosen it up for those people who just want to put the garage up first while they're building the house. But it wouldn't limit it to R1, R2, R3. We go back to the major subdivision, which is almost always the small lots. But we keep the B and maybe add R2, saying that in that, like in Nogally, where it's mostly R2, you can build an accessory building, you just must meet principal building setbacks, which is going to be not a problem for anyone on 3 acres or more, probably. What about that compromise? A little simpler than...
Can I just read that one more time, just so everybody understands that, if that's kind of the consensus? So letter B would read, an accessory building may be constructed in the R1 or R2 zoning district prior to a residential dwelling if the accessory structure meets principal building setbacks. And then C would be changed to read, no accessory building may be constructed in the R3 zoning district or any major subdivision unless a primary residential building is under construction or is already constructed. Is that kind of what?
We've talked a lot about R2, but R3, I know we don't have a whole lot, but what's the defining factor between R2 and R3?
R3 allows up to 3 dwelling units per acre, and again, it's limited to the hamlet areas where they have some community sewer treatment facilities, and the ones I'm aware of would need upgrading anyway. But these are typically located in hamlets that do have existing developments on smaller lots. So I don't think we'll have that issue come up in the R3 district. I really think...
I would add that if someone wanted to do a subdivision on closer to city-size lots, half acre, quarter acre, anything like that, and they came in with a planned sanitary system of some kind, okay, where they were, obviously the only way to make it reached the point where they probably have to have, I don't know, 20, 30 lots on that small, but then it's a common sanitary system, no individual. We could have a new one of these, because that's allowed under our sanitary ordinance, and there are several options you could go. So far, no one has ever wanted to do it in this county. We've actually tried to encourage someone to do it, but no one does. And that's okay, maybe it's coming, as you ask about affordable housing, but sanitary is the driving factor, and we don't have the greatest soils, so it really would need to be a good system. And many people, when they say they want to do it, they come, we insist they talk to the state, and pretty soon they go away because it's just not affordable yet. Maybe it will be, but that's the and so there could be a new R3, but even then you are talking, in order to afford to put that sanitary system in or expand the ones that are out there, you're talking higher density, and at that point you're not going to want this to happen. At least I don't think you do. Maybe you do, but I don't think so.
I would just add to that, Mr. Chair, if I could, that I have experience with some private subdivisions that had shared systems. One of the challenges, if you don't have a local government managing it, getting an entity to do the billing, do the management and upkeep of the system. For example, I mentioned my Goodhue County, Minnesota experience. We had a couple subdivisions that one of the electric co-ops, Goodhue Electric Co-op, was contracted with to manage the system, essentially. They had the mechanism to bill people and to manage maintenance crews and so forth. But it's hard to just have one or two of these, that you have no economy of scale when you do it that way. If it's an area where there's a lot of such systems and someone can do it with some economy of scale and make some money at it, then it's more feasible, as opposed to, a local government taking responsibility.
So we're a ways from that. It's a great idea that isn't economically feasible. When we did this zoning ordinance, I think it was 3 years ago, we spent probably 45 minutes talking about that. I remember that was painful because it seemed like such a great idea, and it just isn't possible in this economy.
I disagree with you 100%, because
And
I've
that-
actually had a lot of time into these particular things, and the biggest issue is exactly what you pointed out. There's companies that will do this, that do management. The problem is that the mechanisms for the companies to do it are limited in how they can do collections and things versus a municipality. So where you run into issues is that somebody decides, I'm not going to pay my sewer bill. How do they collect that? So they, the mechanisms for going through and doing this leaves it so that it's more of an association, and they have to do lawsuits in and amongst the residents, and it's a real mess. So it's the deal with how do you gear it, and a lot of them you have to really tie in with the municipality. I've actually been talking, for instance, to the city of New Richmond about this in the past. And part of the deal is that I also look at is that we're also regulated highly by the amount of particulates that can go into the St. Croix River system, and we're dealing with that all the time. As you know, it's one of the issues we deal with. And if you create these types of systems, it starts to limit the amount of infrastructure necessary and the amount of inflow of new particulates coming into the municipal wastewater treatment systems, because they can be surface cleaned. And then you have if you are working with that municipality, they can go in and they do the pumping and everything in the systems, and so their particulate levels come way down and they can reserve their
I
capacity.
gotta bring us back to the
for
conversation
commercial.
we're having right now,
Yeah.
right here. We're not talking about that.
I'm just,
We got way off.
sorry.
Let's focus. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Scott.
I am compassionate about it.
Yeah, it's a great idea, but like I said, it's not what we're talking about today. Okay, so what guidance do we want to give staff regarding this 15305? Oh, I'm sorry, Jerry.
I think what Ellen proposed, or what she spoke of, opening up the R1 and R2 as long as the setbacks are met would be an equitable way of doing that. We also want to be careful so that we don't make the people who are building being liars by telling us they're going to harvest wood or whatever, so they store their chainsaw in the shed. So I think R1 and R2 would be an excellent way of doing it. I do.
I think I just wanted to clarify with B, if we're adding R1 and R2, and on C, we're going to strike R2, so it's only R3 that we're restricting. Okay, then I'm good with that.
And major subdivisions.
And major subdivisions?
That's usually a smaller lot, but I don't know if you don't.
We had major subdivisions with lot size less than 5 acres.
2-acre average.
Well, it's average, but you can have a major subdivision with large lot.
It's possible.
So you could, some of the townships require anywhere from 5 to 15-acre lots.
I don't want to get way off on a tangent, but one of the other issues we deal with where we differentiate major subdivisions is livestock, and we run into the issue a lot where people want to keep horses and they can't do it, and that dialogue and discussion that led to that, Ellen's filled me in on it. It transpired before I started with the county, but there are some differences in the way majors, regardless of the lot size, are looked at here, is what I would say.
Correct.
So we're staying with the language in the code, the zoning code. If it's a major subdivision, we're going to stay with, I'm asking for a consensus, we're going to stay with the zoning code and not open that can of worms with allowing the buildings going in and allowing livestock. We're not even going to have that conversation. It's been had. Are we good with an agreement on that? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the guidance that we'll give to staff. Thank you. And are we good then to move on to our next item? Yes, John?
The next item that was brought up at the hearing was clarification and discussion of decommissioning requirements for solar and wind energy systems. And decommissioning requirements include the dismantling and sureties and requirements to assure funding for the removal of these systems when their end of life comes. And so a little bit of background in terms of the wind energy systems. So right now in the state of Wisconsin, the legislature has authorized the Public Service Commission to adopt standards that we must follow. Under statute, we cannot be more restrictive when it comes to what we can require for decommissioning standards. So right now in the state of Wisconsin, counties have the option of regulating wind energy systems, large wind energy systems between 1 megawatt and 100 megawatts in size. Anything over 100 megawatts, the Public Service Commission has siting and permitting authority. So the county can focus on those projects between 1 megawatt and 100 megawatts. We do require a conditional use permit for those types of projects. To give the committee a little bit of perspective, well, how big is a 100 megawatt project? You know, an average wind turbine can range anywhere between 2.5 and 2.75 megawatts. With new technology, it's pushing 3, maybe a little bit more. So that would average about a 25 to 35 turbine farm. So that's kind of the scale we're talking about. So when we were reviewing the code language or the draft that was in your packet, everything you see was pretty much taken from state statute. And within the language, it talks specifically about what the county can do for requiring bonds, letter of credits, escrow accounts, things of that nature. The county has the option of requiring 3 estimates for decommissioning the wind energy system, and then the county can take the average of those 3 estimates if we're not pleased about what we get from the developer of that project. The question also came up about the ownership issue and what happens when ownership changes. And again, this is taken out of statute too, but through our conditional use permit, we can regulate and require that when the change of ownership occurs, they need to give the county 30 days notice of that change. And since we would adopt this as part of a conditional use permit through the Board of Adjustment process, you know, if they fail to do that, theoretically, well, technically, the project would be in violation of the conditional use permit. The notice shall also include information showing that the financial responsibility of this chapter, the decommissioning amount, was assumed by the new owner. So I know it was raised as a question, and you know, do we have enough in there in terms of language? But we do follow the guidance we have in state statute and Public Service Commission rules when it comes to that. We did review a number of other county codes in the state. We looked at Marathon, Monroe County, Dane County. I can't remember the other ones, but they have very similar language when it comes to wind energy decommissioning. Solar energy is going to be a little bit different, but we're just talking about wind energy right now.
Yeah, my great concern for this is keeping up with the change in ownership. Sometimes this happens 4 or 5 times a year. The other issue we have is that many of the owners that change from time to time are publicly traded in other countries, overseas. For instance, in Texas, which is a rather large state right now, there are more Chinese-owned wind generators than there are American-owned wind generators. So when they change hands, you think that maybe somebody in an office someplace in China is going to notify St. Croix Electric and say, oh, by the way, we changed. I guess so. So that's what brings me back to, if there's a way, and I've got a letter into the Public Service Commission, if that could not change to say not the owner may comply by choosing a bond, but it's in that first, up there. Not only the owner, but maybe the county could decide which one. And I know in Minnesota, there are some counties that have made that decision. So is it different there? And this has been about 3 years ago when I talked to the people there. Or has that changed? You know, again, if we go back to the Chinese scenario, it's going to be real hard, I think, for us to collect any money on that.
And again, the way we would track it would be through the conditional use permit process. The seller, if the owner sells the option or the project to another entity, by ordinance and by the conditional use permit that the Board of Adjustment would approve, they would be obligated to follow that. And like, yeah, I get it. I mean, how do we track that if it does change? But the language is there, we could go after it once we found out.
If I could, I would just add, most of these projects are organized with like a limited liability corporation. They set it up for the project. And that was the case, for example, with the St. Croix Valley Solar that we approved last CUP for last December. You know, their parent company, Avangrid, is a Spanish-based large renewable, but they have a North American subsidiary, and they set up a limited liability corporation for the particular project. And we require that they provide contacts as part of the CUP process. In the case of the St. Croix Valley Solar, we had entered into a development agreement that stipulates that contact and that time frame, they have to inform us if ownership is changing or if there'll be a different contact. So that's our way of doing it. Of course, you have to stay with it and be attentive. And if something changes and we feel they haven't met their obligation, obviously we would have to follow up on it. But that's just an example.
My concern is you won't know when that happens if it happens in another nation, another world power
Well, if the-
or no power. I mean, how would you know?
Well, if the ownership of the, what's difficult is a lot of these facilities are leased. So I understand what you're saying. So the ownership of the property may not change.
Right, you bring up something interesting there because the owner of that property in many cases is still the farmer because he put a lease out on it. So I was thinking of this when I should have been thinking of something else last night and sleeping. Maybe we don't have a stake in this. We don't have any skin in this game. Maybe that's just up to the farmer, and the county can come back to the farmer and say, oh, you have to reclaim your land. You have to take those 28 or 23 towers down and blast out those 20-foot concrete basements and restore it. Maybe that's where the issue should lie. I'm not sure how successful that will be. You know, most of these things have a 20-year life, maybe a 30-year life, and none of them in Wisconsin have gotten that old yet.
Now they're saying maybe 40.
I think our only comment would be that we've followed the statute. We don't think the statute for wind energy systems allows us to do anything more than what we've put in this. We don't think it allows us to, what you talked to John and I about prior was if we got a cash instead of a letter of credit or a bond, then even if it changes owners 6 times, we're sitting on cash. We could certainly ask for it, and that is one of the options that's in our, you can see the list in here, but the list does say bond, deposit, escrow account, irrevocable letter of credit, or some combination. So if we just don't know that, especially for wind, where it's very right in the statutes, we don't think we have the authority to go beyond it. If it's under 100 megawatts, 99 or less, we would do everything we could. But I still don't know if we have the authority to go beyond. And if it's above 99, then we don't even have approval authority.
Can we ask the Public Service Commission if they'll change that? Are they open to change, or are they?
John talked to them. He can tell you about his most recent conversation.
Well, going back under the PSC rules, it's just one of the first paragraphs. It just says a political subdivision may not place any restrictions or regulations that exceed what's in PSC 128. So that's kind of their preamble. That's right in the language up front. I had a different question for PSC staff that had to deal with projects over 100 megawatts. That removes the county entirely from any approval, permitting, or siting process. And they actually decide whether or not a decommissioning amount in surety is put in place. We can request one. The town that the project is located in can request a bond or surety, but that's up to the PSC.
So what have they done in those large projects? What have they required of the?
I just briefly looked at some of the dockets that have been approved. The larger projects, the local jurisdictions have requested a surety, and that's been built into the approval.
In what form?
The one I looked at was a letter of credit. There were some others, I didn't look much beyond that, but.
And I've been following this through my Planning and Zoning Administrators Directors User Group for about 2.5 years. And when I reached out and asked, this was quite a while ago, this was last year when we were doing our own first solar one, most of them aren't actually requiring any surety at all. And we did with the one we did last year, but we did not require a full surety because without disclosing anything more, we just say that some of the property owners had their own sureties. So that was a factor for the Board of Adjustment.
Do we really have any of that burden on us if it's a farmer's agreement with the developer? Does the county really have bear any of that burden, any of that weight? And we would have to change zoning to accommodate that, but does that put us in any way
John,
responsible
you want?
for decommissioning?
I think the concern we have is that we don't know what the agreements look like between the utility and the individual property owner or farmer. They may or may not have decommissioning agreements or, sureties that the utility puts up in favor of the property owner. So we're not privy to that information, and that's not shared with us, obviously, by the utility. So they may have one, they may not. So we kind of take the more conservative role, and like Mike mentioned, through the recently approved solar project that went through the Board of Adjustment, we did require a letter of credit. Partial.
There's a difference with wind energy and solar. Wind energy covers a lot more geographic, a lot more land area typically for a project because of the separation you need with the wind turbines. The amount of concrete that goes in the ground to support one of those over 400 foot tall structures is extraordinary. The amount of electrical infrastructure, the cabling to connect everything. I dealt with some proposals that were 50 wind turbines spread over 10,000 acres. So, as opposed to our project that we approved for 99 megawatts on about 700 acres, or total project area of about 1,000 acres. So you're talking an order of magnitude much different. There is more public interest in seeing that infrastructure is properly removed, made safe if the project ends. With the solar, it's a little different in that it's easier to remove, but it's still a lot of material to deal with. There may be some recycled value or reuse value, but it's an awful lot of solar panels. And realize there are a lot of solar projects going in throughout the nation. So it's an issue of handling that right. We received a very detailed estimate of what the anticipated cost would be and for decommissioning from for the St. Croix Valley Solar Project, which was really helpful and really helped educate us, and that helped inform the decisions that we made in terms of negotiating what would be acceptable to the county for decommissioning.
And not to go too far, but we took the position also that is our role really to totally clean up the site, pertinent to what you just asked? And we took the position that our role would be to secure the site until such time as if for some reason the farmer defaulted or the owner defaulted, whoever it was, go secure it so that there wasn't vandalism and that kind of thing. And they are already fenced, so they're already fenced. But having someone go in, secure the site in some manner, and then we'd have, if someone did default and said, oh my gosh, I don't want to deal with this, I'm going to walk away from it, then of course there's the tax deed route, and then the new owners would be required to clean it up. So we looked at it as more secure, and I have no idea what it'll cost to secure it, but we tried to come up with a number that we thought would be reasonable. And that's the way we looked at it. No different than when we have dealt with a major subdivision that has defaulted, which we've had. We had it during the recession on several of them. And we said, we're not going to finish building the roads. We're not going to finish putting in the stormwater ponds. That's not our job. We're going to stabilize the site go in and deal with any erosion, any blowouts, which we had, and then we're gonna keep it stabilized until it goes through the tax deed process, which of course takes anywhere from, well, usually about 3 years. So that's how we looked at it, and that's all I think honestly, that's probably all we should look at for these two, unless things change. Just some reasonable amount and not trying to be, and then maybe we'll be able to get cash out of someone. I think that's going to be a hard thing to do.
My hope is that it doesn't end up being blight, that, for the same reason we don't want junk piled up on any particular property. We don't want an old solar array to be in disrepair on the landscape. I'd like to have a plan for this to be, restored. So if not for agricultural use, then for residential, or, put up a school, or, something.
So does that mean we should expand that amount that we allow for junk and just say for spent solar arrays, or not?
They say that this steel can all be, there's so much steel there, it has a fair amount of value to be recycled. The glass and the heavy metals that are in the solar panels are a problem, and that has to be handled as hazmat. That's the other conversation that we'll have to have. But as far as it goes, are you all comfortable? Now that we've had the conversation, we just didn't have time for in the meeting on the 15th. I think I've been assuaged, and I think what we've done, what you have done, is really good work, and I'm satisfied. Or what do you think?
I would tell you to suggest to the people that you get cash up front. Cash spends, bonds. Hard to buy bacon with bonds and promises.
I'm worried that if we asked for cash, we would never have these businesses coming to St. Croix County, and that the landowners would lose out on the opportunity that other landowners in other counties and other states are getting. I'm not even going into the conversation about renewable energy, because that's not my concern. I'm looking at it as an economic development perspective.
It sounds like we don't even have the option to request cash. Like, we can make a polite thing that it would be nice to have, or we'd prefer it, but it's not like we can use that as grounds on determining whether a project is accepted or not.
That's what it sounds like. I had a great conversation with a gentleman who's the administrator of a county nearby, and he said it would be great if we could get cash. I said, you're right. He said, okay. It's just, because I was really struggling with this. I was at the County Association convention last week, as you were. Worked through this study in detail. It just sounds like it's just almost impossible. It sounds like it's impossible. So, I'm giving a thumbs up on you. It is. Anybody else have any other? I'm not thumbs up. What do you think, Grant? Reserve of judgment?
I think we have such limited authority there. I mean, the only thing that I see with under ownership changes, we can't do anything with the language in the large ones. With the small ones, to me it makes more sense that we would have notification prior to the ownership change, but as in built in with title and change of ownership. But is that a real possibility? I don't know.
Mike, is that something we have any control over on a smaller facility? Can we ask them to give us notification before they change ownership?
I mean, I think that can be we do that with mining.
Yeah, but it says here on or within 30 days. And you're right, it'd be nicer if it was 30 days prior to the effective date of the change, and if it didn't say on the day of the change, that would be better too. I would guess that we could say that for maybe and try it for those less than,
What is
less
our-
than the 100 megawatts.
What is our verbiage on the conditional use permit?
Well, once the conditional use permit is issued, we have to have the letter of credit almost pretty much
But change
immediately.
of ownership?
Oh, okay.
Because aren't they in non-compliance until they, like, the day it happens, correct?
Yeah, I'd have to look at our language we include. I don't have it right in front of me. But one thing I would say is on the financial assurance, with letters of credit, typically there's a requirement that you have to be notified, at least 30 days prior. Some jurisdictions use more than that, prior to, expiration or ending. So that if it's not going to be renewed, you could go after it if you feel you need to. So,
Yeah, that's why actually for anything to do with a CUP or a major or a minor, we prefer an irrevocable letter of credit, which means it cannot be revoked unless they notify us.
yes.
And that's written right into the letter of credit that we have, and they have to notify us. And I believe they do give us 1 month ahead of time. We've had that, I agree with Jerry that I don't like bonds, because during the recession, we got burned by a couple of bonds that failed. One bank that we tried contacting them in Scotland, because it had been sold so many times, and we never did get very much of anything out of that. But irrevocable letters of credit, we were solid on. During the whole recession, and of the many defaults we had, those were fine, the bonds were not. So if I could change it to say, that's the only one we accept, that's what I'd do, because then you don't have to put it in the ordinance, the 30 days, it's in the irrevocable letter of credit. But I don't think we can be that hardcore. Sometimes there's very small projects, and that's not reasonable, because they cost more, of course. The irrevocable letter of credit costs the developer more. So it's not, we have to be reasonable and fair, and it doesn't matter what I like.
I just want to make sure that we're consistent with the permitting process and everything, that if they need to renew their permit, that it's day of ownership change, then we should be the same in here.
We can double check that and bring any changes to you
Yeah.
at the next committee meeting, because, and we do have an escrow system set up that we track, because many times we're talking 2 to 3 years on a major subdivision, of course, because you're talking about vegetation, making sure the vegetation takes, so. We do have but this is even longer. This will be new for us, which we're only 1.5 years into it, so.
So that covers wind, and we're not even tackling solar today?
Solar is a little bit different than the wind energy systems. The Public Service Commission still controls the approval and siting and permitting of anything over 100 megawatts. So again, the county is left regulating anything under 100 megawatts. As Mike mentioned earlier, we did have a CUP approval last year for a project in the town of Warren and Richmond. So under the county code, we would require a conditional use permit for any commercial solar project, and that would be any project that generates power that's taken and sold off-site. We included some language in the draft code, and that we included in your packet. And basically, we tried to keep it simple. We reviewed other codes. We're not limited by rules or statute that prohibits us from requiring different things. But under the conditional use permit provisions, one of the application requirements is that a decommissioning and site plan restoration, or a site restoration plan providing reasonable financial assurance that the large energy solar system will be removed at the end of its useful life. And so we took a look at other codes, and a lot of the other codes we looked at kept the language very simple. I think in some cases, less is more when it comes to regulations. And again, the wording states that providing reasonable financial assurance. It leaves it pretty broad and gives some discretion to the Board of Adjustment and what they think is reasonable.
So it's not something that gets worked into the zoning code, it's something that's left to the Board of Adjustment?
It's in the zoning code as we just kind of read it off. It would be under the solar energy system provisions, but the Board of Adjustment would reference that as part of their findings and approval process and, you know, state that that's where the language is coming from. And so then they would use that, and then Mike and his staff would work with the owner of the project to determine the surety, letter of credit, whatever it may be.
As part of the submittal process, we'd usually be asking for, requiring a cost estimate for decommissioning and what their plan is for decommissioning. And then would have to evaluate, do those costs seem reasonable, and is there any assumptions on any escalating for, you know, inflation, changes in cost over the lifespan of the project?
I do want to get onto these other items, and I'm pretty sure that that's going to run the course similar to wind. I'm not, do you see that we need to pick that up on another time, the solar, or do we want to leave it the way it is in the zoning ordinance?
I agree. I think the solar will follow the wind. Solar is a little easier to deal with because not too much stuff is going to fall on people. The dangerous part is not there.
Except for the chemicals that are left sitting in those solar panels.
Right, but they're going to go in that junk portion of your.
I have a lot of confidence in the Board of Adjustment as well. The current Board of Adjustment, who knows what's going to happen in 20 years? I don't know, but we have an option to fix this at any time. So let's move on. Let's move on to the next item, which is our skiing. And if we can't get through that by 4:30, we will set that aside and move on to the permitting, because I want to wrap this up within 2 hours. Okay, so let's talk about our skiing ordinance.
So on September 15th, we had the public hearing, and there were a number of people in attendance. I later learned that they were representatives of the St. Croix National Golf Club who were desiring to speak regarding our skiing facility standards. I think they misunderstood how the public hearing process worked, and they missed their opportunity to comment during the public hearing portion of the meeting. After the meeting, I reached out to the National Golf Club to learn what they wanted to say, and parts of what they wanted to comment on were relating to our exceptions on steep slopes. Because the hearing was closed and we were going to have a study session where, you know, commissioners could provide staff comments to review, we requested that the ski people, the ski representatives, contact one or all of the committee members so that they could relay the comments here in the study session. We also made St. Croix National aware of the meeting we were having today. So we kind of put this information in as a preemptive on the assumption that they were going to reach out to one or all of you. I'm not sure if that took place. We'll find out. So I'm not sure how far the committee wants to go with this. Maybe I'll just defer to you. I can basically state that the gist of their comments is that as part of the new ski standards, we adopted some exceptions for development on steep slopes. So as the committee knows, you know, ski facilities are developed on steep slopes. So as part of the exceptions, we allowed certain construction to take place on steep slopes in excess of 25%. And they had to deal more with the ski lifts, the ski trails themselves, the snowmaking equipment, you know, the irrigation poles that spray the water to make the snow, and lighting. We didn't really deem those as major structures. You see them as a necessity for the main ski use itself. My understanding was the golf club's concern, the National Event Center's concern, was that a portion of their facility that they had worked with Mike on initially as part of one of their initial submittals showed a portion of their ski chalet, which is a larger structure, to be encroaching into some areas of steep slope in excess of 25%. So we allow those as exceptions. I think in the emails I received from the Golf and Ski Club group was that they would have liked to have added the ski chalet structure as part of the exception. Does that make sense to you? We're allowing certain exceptions. They wanted to expand that list to say, if we need to build a portion of our ski chalet, which 15,000 square foot building, if we needed to encroach into a portion of a steep slope in excess of 25%, that the code would allow us to do that. So again, I'm not sure if they reached out to the committee members to convey that. And I'll kind of leave it open with that. That's kind of where things were left off.
And if I, go ahead.
If we were to leave the chalet off of that exemption, how close could they be to the steep slope without being in non-compliance?
You can, with the proper permitting, we can allow structures right up to 25% or greater slope, but so it doesn't have to be set back from it necessarily. It can go right up to it, but if it's 25% or greater with at least a 50-foot horizontal measure, then that kind of development is restricted. They did, I would add that they had some parking area, parking circulation area that, depending on how the steep slope's interpreted, could encroach a little. You're obviously not building parking lots on 25% or greater slope, but the question is, can you grade it? Can you create a terrace that you could park or drive on? That really becomes the question on this. If the committee's interested in discussing this further, we can share John and I can share further thoughts on it.
My concern is this, that we're able to allow them to do business. My concern is that we're able to protect the rather fragile slope. You know, I want to protect the environment over there with 25% slope. However, you can't ski on something that's not steep, right? So those are conflicting concerns. However, I skied there when I was a kid. You know, that was Snowcrest. And it seems to have survived. The landscape is still there. So what are they going to do differently that we didn't do when, you know, in the 1970s and 80s? That's the question. How are they going to affect it differently that could possibly hurt it?
It's not about the skiing. We've made exception for all that. It's about a chalet, a structure, that's what they're talking about, or parking. And we did note in our report that this would be a significant change to have a principal structure like a ski chalet allowed on 25% slope. I would be very concerned about it because we don't allow that right now in any district. We only have public use is the only exception. And so I think we'd have to definitely go back out to public hearing and hear what the public had to say on that.
So is what they're proposing to actually put the structure on the actual slope or on top or below the slope?
We've seen some different versions of a potential site plan, partially because of this issue of having to change the rules to allow development on the slopes for the ski snowboard area. You know, they didn't come forward with a final plan back when they originally proposed the conditional use, but they did. Some of the iterations of their plan showed a ski chalet structure or a combination ski school, ski rental chalet that that would encroach into, at least based on the county's data, into 25% or greater slope. It's almost like it's a walkout style where you can walk or drive right up to one level, and then it's got a lower level that exits out onto the slopes. And it's right at the edge of where it drops off. So some of the building maybe was into it, some of it was not. I think they wanted, maybe they're thinking they need flexibility. That's our assumption here.
What was your last comment?
Maybe we think they feel they need some flexibility given the limitations of their site, that there's some bands of steeper slope. But the chalet was really going to be at the top of where the slope drops off, and partially into the steeper area.
Comments, thoughts?
To me, for someone that skis, there's logistically ways that makes sense. And for us to, I know it's not a typical use that we use anywhere else, but in this situation, it makes sense that, especially in like where the rental facilities may be, or which usually comes with skiers that are less competent, being able to go out directly onto a small slope right there rather than moving along a large horizontal piece that's difficult for some of those to do, makes a lot of sense. That's all I'll say for now.
I guess for the structure and the things, if the site limitations are to a point that they're put into a position that they don't have a lot of alternatives, or that it makes a lot of sense into the design work. Obviously, if they're doing something like this, the concerns would be also that they're going through all of the the compaction and everything when they start digging footings down into the type of soils that we have in St. Croix County. If you get a lot of gravels and things that are down there, you have to really look at what the potential for slippage or storm events, or there's so many things that can impact the structural, that we'd want to make sure that they have good state approvals and the compactions are done. I have more disagreement with if they're doing some large embankments of parking structure to try to increase parking out and pushing a bunch of fill out and building big retaining walls. And then if I'm understanding kind of where the gist of this was going on the parking side, for the simple fact that when you're doing that type of thing, again, there's a considerable amount that needs to go into that with geostructure and all kinds of things as they're bringing this up to ensure that wall isn't ever compromised, and then the type of block that they're using, or what type what has the life expectancy that's going to be there, where that doesn't become a future hazard. So with the structure part of it, with that, I'm a little more concerned about versus a part of a building that's out over huge concrete pylons that are sunk really deep down and they're all engineered, if that makes sense.
Makes good sense. How much of this needs to be zoning? How much of this then would go to the Board of Adjustment? And where do we draw the line?
So, I think the 25% thing, it sounds like definitely needs to go through us, but the specifics of the planning would probably have to go through the Board of Adjustment, which if the Board of Adjustment, it sounds like they know what they're doing, would make sure that everything's engineered properly and secured properly and has a maintenance plan probably involved in ensuring that stuff stays solid.
Then, what I'm hearing the committee say is that I think you agree with me. We'd like to continue to say we want to see the economic development of a ski area. We want to accommodate that, but we wanted to do it in a environmentally responsible way. And we want to accommodate the requests. So we write the zoning in such a way that it puts it in front of the Board of Adjustment. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think, I mean, what I'm saying is it should go in front of the Board of Adjustment and make sure whatever they're doing is secured and engineered properly, but also there's still that language where they have to maintain the slope and have to take care of it no matter what is done with it, right? So that would still apply to this addition.
Right, so the
Very-
committee is establishing the standards. We're going to be putting the standards in the zoning ordinance.
Right, and bear in mind, they have to
So-
show a hardship to do something that's outside of what we as a committee or the staff puts before us to approve. They have to show a hardship to go beyond what we establish as a standard.
To try to simplify this, I think what you were talking about with slopes and maintaining slopes can all be part of this. I'm failing to grasp the need to go to Board of Adjustment with the slopes and the ski part is going to be taken care of. Are you talking about the building itself? Because the building itself, I mean, something of this size is going to get state approvals and everything else. It's really not in our realm to go after that. And I don't think that making them go through another process of Board of Adjustment is really needed.
I think the Board of Adjustment is still needed though for the slopes, and this would probably be part of the review for the whole plan, because I think correct me if I'm wrong, but the way this is written, one, we need to include chalet in a permitted conditional use for 25% slope, which is up to us as a policy guideline to set that's even acceptable as a possible option that the Board of Adjustment can consider. But where else was I going with this? Oh, also, the Board of Adjustment would have to approve the whole plan as part of allowing a ski hill, which would include the building, and obviously the contingency would be that it would be reviewed by the state for whatever it needs to be reviewed for to ensure that it's structurally sound.
And just to clarify, the skiing facilities are listed as a conditional use permit in the commercial 3 district. So regardless, it's going to the Board of Adjustment to get the conditional use permit.
I think it would be a question of whether any variance would be required, right, John?
Depending on what standards we adopt. So depending on the language you choose to add or not add to the exception language that's highlighted in yellow, if you add ski chalet to that, well, that's a standard that we would allow development of ski chalets on slopes in excess of 25%. So the Board of Adjustment would review the conditional use permit based on those standards and whatever exceptions we allow through the zoning ordinance. So again, as the Community Development Committee, you review and update and amend the zoning standards that the Board of Adjustment then follows in carrying out the execution of the conditional use permit.
I'm thinking of any number of chalets that I've seen in Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, that are built in the side of a hill, a mountain, and they're built in some fairly steep terrain. It's done all the time, and it's done safely. And I don't think it's for us to say it can't be. So I think we should, if they can do it, and if they find the wherewithal and the money to do it, and it could be good for our community, I think we should say, okay.
I would agree that we add the chalet onto the list.
Just from the standpoint of this could open up a lot of steep slopes for a lot of uses in the county, requests for the ordinance to be changed, since right now we don't allow it. Could you guys consider that maybe we would try to draft between now and the next committee meeting, like a percentage? Like, so that instead of the whole thing being right on the whole slope, built into literally the side of a slope versus at the top and into a little bit of the slope, that it might be less than 100%.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a percentage of a building or a certain amount of square feet can overhang, like that could be up to, you know, we could, I guess, determine what the standard is. I wanted, I guess, the intention, I agree with you that a whole building on a steep slope is, I don't think, a direction I specifically want to go in.
Okay.
But yeah, a percentage or square footage limit or something like that would be pretty reasonable.
Okay.
Also, can we establish use? I see this as for renting skis and selling skis, having a pro shop, perhaps it's selling hot chocolate. I don't think, I don't see this being interpreted as you can build a wedding venue out on the St. Croix River.
Yeah, right, but no, I think what Ellen's getting at and is just that if you add ski chalet to the list of approved expansions, why can't you add another definition for something else?
Parking,
Yeah,
other things.
right,
We'll get a lot of requests
yeah.
after this. So maybe if we, going back to the purpose statement that John would like to tie it to, that because skiing is has to have steep slopes in order to be skiing, that's a part of the reason, and then adding into what Dan said about relating to rental of skis, ability to work initial hills, training hills, entry hills, whatever. And I'm just thinking that now that relates to a portion, not can we build it on the side of a.
Right.
We don't have cliffs here, but we do. We have bluffs and we have other very steep areas in quite a few locations. Maybe we'll work on some language that allows it, but perhaps up to a certain amount. I don't know, perhaps 25, 35, 45, something percent, certainly not 100%.
Is there a reason that we want to restrict to a certain percent?
I just would like to make sure that it doesn't, I think that will lead to a lot of requests. And right now, we have had for 20, almost probably over 20 years, that we don't allow disturbance of 25% of the slope for any purpose other than public improvement.
Right, but in this, we're tying it to ski facility standards, so they wouldn't necessarily, unless somebody else wants to put another ski facility in.
Yeah, that's not what I mean. I think it will lead to a lot more requests to change the ordinance and open it up for a lot of other uses.
Perhaps we could use the language, alpine skiing, we can call it an alpine ski facility. Make it very clear it's downhill skiing.
We'll enhance the purpose section and explain the uniqueness of the ski facility use, the fact that it depends on slopes for its primary function. And I think we can expand on the purpose section and focus on the uniqueness of the use so it differentiates, you know, the issues of other users wanting to go into steep slopes.
I just add, many of our ski areas in central Minnesota, Wisconsin, have not had to build their buildings on steep slopes, but you do have an example in this part of the country of Lutzen Resort, which is more like a mountain resort, and a lot of their structures are built mid-slope on an area that was created for that purpose. It can be done. It takes more precaution. Primarily, our concern in regulating is erosion control and stormwater management, honestly, with the development. That's what a lot of what our focus is on. And it just presents some additional challenges. Not impossible to overcome, mind you, but additional challenges. We don't want to open up all the slopes everywhere.
I wish we could afford a field trip out to Whitefish, but we can't.
Yeah.
All right, folks, I need to pivot. I think that wraps it up. We've given them some pretty good guidance here. Let's talk about sanitary systems, and who's going to lead that conversation to start us out? Or is that me? The way I will give you my perspective of what I think has been happening, and then anybody can jump in. We have had a perennial problem of folks perceiving issues within the department, of delays that haven't necessarily been delays that are caused by the counties, by the community development department. There's a fair amount of paperwork that needs to be turned in for POUTS permits, and sometimes a permit holder will simply not turn in all the paperwork, and sometimes fingers will get pointed, and blame will be placed squarely on the county. And it's a frustration. It's a frustration when I hear that the county's screwed something up, and I turn around and I ask, why is this not happening? And I see an inquiry being done, and it comes back, well, you know, that calls were made, and paperwork wasn't turned in. And it's a frustration because I see good people doing hard work and being blamed for not doing that work. And I'd like to find a system, this is me personally, my opinion, I'd like to find a system where we can have a more open system that allows all stakeholders, you know, a builder, an owner, and a contractor, access to the process at any given time. That's my vision, personal, Dan Hansen's vision for permitting, for POUTS, and maybe all permitting. And I wanted to share that with you right off the get-go. And I'd like to see what staff has to say. I'd like to see what you guys have to say. And I wanted to put that on the table. So I think it'd be useful if Ellen or one of you guys describe each step of the process of permitting, what needs to be turned in, and where you see the problems in miscommunication happening, and then we can talk about how what your thoughts are.
And I'm happy to go over it as far as there are, I don't have a sanitary application in front of me, if that's what you want to focus on. The questions at the time of the committee meeting, when they were brought up, were related to sanitary mostly, but there was kind of a general statement about asking for general information also. So we've provided some general information about all the timeframes we meet for our various things. If Julie, if you could move it down or John, you can go ahead, because you're familiar with it too. So we've provided that general information. We've provided this to committee members in the past. We have a lot of deadlines, and we are required to meet all those deadlines, and we do, because we have to. If we don't, or permits are issued without review, or permits are issued, and there are times when we do ask for a small extension, the owner applicant has to agree with those extensions, always. So those are our deadlines and our standards that we work from. For sanitaries, you can see that from the time we receive complete all information that's required under state statute, and all fees, we have 30 days to review those applications. And I've checked with Mike and all of his team, and we haven't missed a deadline. So, and we actually did some reviewing of our data to make sure, and we are cleaning up some data, but for the most part, we have not missed any deadlines, anything we can find. Now, with that said, the issue, which Dan just mentioned, is complete applications and fees. And the number of applications we get, I can't tell you exactly how many it is, but there are lots of them that come in that are incomplete. For lots of various reasons, I'm sure. We've made a lot of changes in the last few years, trying to eliminate anything that we can. I've identified over the past 3 years the changes that we've made. We no longer require land use permits to be issued prior to the sanitary permit. We worked with the building inspectors, made them aware of the concern, and now it's the building permit that doesn't get issued until the land use permit shows up. But the sanitary permit is issued. We've got a turnback rule. We made it tougher. We basically said, we're no longer going to sit on these and give you guys endless amounts of time and then blame us because you don't get stuff in. So if you don't get stuff in, we're just packaging it up, sending it back to the applicant, and issuing a refund with a couple of deductions. Another thing we do is we used to phone call after phone call after phone call. Hey, we need you to get that stuff in. Hey, when are you going to get that in? You know, you still need this. We're not going to do that anymore. We stopped doing that. You've got one notice, and that's all you get. And if you don't get it in, it's returned. We keep making changes. We used to take the time to make copies because there is a rule that the plumbers must send a copy once they receive the permit, because they're the actual applicants for the most part, but we have to issue it to the plumber, and then that plumber has to give a copy to the property owner. We changed all that. We no longer copy and mail and make extra copies. We only email. We scan and email, and we've done that over a year ago, and to make it faster, and the plumber has the responsibility to get it to the homeowner, not us. So that helps. I don't know if it helps if the homeowner never gets it, but it is a plumber's responsibility, not ours. Again, we no longer require a homeowner's signature on a septic maintenance agreement. We started that many years ago, right when the state changed the law and said that every private sanitary system has to be pumped once every 3 years. That was a big change that had to be made. The state made it mandatory. We went through a lot of process to get all of our systems in our database. That's when we first purchased the database we have now, and all of those systems are in it. We can do our third of all sanitaries. We send out an email every year, plus we send out postcards, and whenever those postcards go out, the whole office has to handle tons of phone calls about, what is this? Why do I have to do it? I already had it done. Why didn't my plumber turn it in? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we've made it so plumbers can fill out that data online, because they have to do it. But the people don't like getting reminded of something they already done. They get real irritated. So we've done everything we can, and we started that signature because we were trying to make sure that people realize this is going to come, and you have to maintain it. And if you don't, you will have failing systems. But we got rid of it because it added an extra step for the plumbers, slowed things down. So we've made a lot of changes over the last 3 years, trying to make things smoother, better. And we do have a system that we use. It's not perfect. It is designed mostly for sanitary systems. It's not, and reporting to the state, which we have to do. That whole state plan review is, well, it's just, we give copies of everything to the state. And then that is the biggest thing we do. You know, it says in here, our numbers. We have over 400 the last few years. At the peak, prior to the recession, we did 900 in 1 year. And we had a few more people than we have now, but not very many. That was a nightmare, frankly. And not only that, but it isn't just, we get in, we have to review the soil tests, we have to review the application. Then after we issue the application, when the plumbers are actually going to install, there's anywhere from 1 to 4 inspections. We have 24 hours notice this plumber can give us. We must be on site and have a time we set up with them within that 24 hours. We have that down to a science, where we have additional support staff who help schedule those. Our staff all have phones, they all have things. That isn't really, and we do our best. We've gotten some complaints, talked to different plumbers about how we've had so much turnover. We got to train people. This particular year, we've had 2 people. It's all that have been licensed by the state to do it. That is a problem. We need 4 people at all times. It's just what we need in order to stay ahead of this volume. we work on it. We have someone who took their test yesterday, crossing our fingers, he passes, but they have 2 tests they have to pass. So one test doesn't get us everything we need, and they aren't easy tests to pass. Some people pass really fast. We've had one person who passed in only 3 months. That person really knew what he was doing, had a background in it from a family point of view. We have other people, a year, that's the maximum we give them for the one test, takes the full year before they pass. We've had people take the test as many as 2 and 3 times. It's a process, it's a system. I'd be happy to answer any questions on all of this. Tried to give you guys good information. You've had it for a little while now to read through it. As far as complaints, again, we're not missing deadlines. We aren't. We've checked. And we're doing our best to get more people trained up. And we're doing our best to stay ahead of all the applications and all the majors and the minors and everything else that we get. It has been very challenging at times when we have staff turnover. So I could go on, but I feel like I should be answering questions, finding out what you guys are interested in knowing.
We got 15
Yeah.
minutes, so we'll
Okay,
be done with it.
so let me
Go ahead.
shut up.
Well, when we met a while ago, we talked about software. And ideally, in my perfect world of being a contractor, I would love to see an online portal that each one of our, whether it's a plumber or a contractor or whoever, has a username, has a login. They could go in and they could see what permits they're in process, which ones they don't have all their stuff in at, and that, so that you're not answering those kinds of questions on a daily basis with phone calls. You can just tell them to log in on their site and see what there is and what they're missing.
Yes.
So that would be, I guess, my task to you, to try to find something that works in that way. I think that would alleviate a lot of problems.
Okay, and I will give you an update on that after Mr. Anderson tells me what it is.
The one difficulty with having logins and stuff is that would involve a lot of extra IT time, I feel like, because people would be constantly be resetting passwords and stuff like that. There'd be another option where you could have a checkbox on the permit saying I am okay with this being information, or my permit status being on the website, so I can check it regularly myself or whatever, because it's not really private information, but like getting the, is it?
It's public.
Yeah, but getting that like check mark, like, hey, you knew it would be posted if you cross this, like, you know, check this box if you want to be able to check the status automatically. By the way, so someone who doesn't necessarily live here would be able to check it too, like just something where that way you're minimizing the login, but somebody can still check it themselves without having to deal with the login, doing it online and remotely.
One thing that Supervisor O'Connell's really poor experience brought to light of is that all those documents are public documents. So they don't need to be sheltered in any way.
And we have, I think we mentioned when we had that conversation earlier this year, you and I and Mike, that we have been looking, and he isn't able to be here today, Brett Boudreau, who is our GIS person. You've seen he's presented at our meetings, but I had tasked him about 1.5 years ago with find us a new system. Brett's been looking and trying. Most of them won't do that, what you're asking. They aren't built that way. They're built to do other things. We just recently, thanks to our county administrator, had a system forwarded to us that we've taken a quick look. Twice we've met and looked at it, and we're going to have another meeting tomorrow. It would do everything you've said. It would be great, really, really great. It's cloud-based, and it would, I think it'd be very positive. Of course, there'd be a lot of learning curve and transferring data. So the trouble, of course, with something that will do what you want is the price. You knew where I was going. And so I asked, we're going to find out tomorrow a more specific number, but the way their approach of this particular company is we have a startup fee to get it set up, and then after that we have an annual subscription. And most software is going to annual subscriptions. So I asked more concerned about the annual subscription than the startup price. What's ballpark the annual subscription for me? First, they wouldn't do it, and then finally they said, okay, we'll ballpark it, give you a range, and then we'll get back to you. 30 to 100,000 per year subscription price.
How much?
30,000 to 100,000 per year subscription price.
That's quite a range.
And he said he went below what it would probably be and above what it would probably be. So you pick. I'll find out tomorrow, and probably 60 to 80,000 startup costs to get what you want.
I mean,
You tell me, what should I do next?
are we paying a subscription for the current software we use?
Yes, we are, and it's more like about 15,000 per
Yeah.
year. And it doesn't do anything like, and we've tried some changes, we've worked with them, every little thing costs money and a lot more money, and it's never what we wanted.
It had some deficiencies besides just sanitary, it's other things.
Yeah,
too.
Right.
yeah, it's not really designed for anything else, and we use it for other things, but not very well. Go
Right.
ahead,
In my mind, I see it similar to what the court system uses up there. If you e-file and you have the system, you can get in there and you can see everything that's in there. It can be very similar to that. You know, if a software company is going to charge $30,000 to $100,000, then I know that we could have that custom software built for less than that.
And we've got, we're going to keep reaching out, keep trying to find another system that'll work, but those are, I don't know what my budget is. How's that, guys?
I'd have to say custom software, and I've given some thought to that, because you and I had that conversation, but once you get a glitch and it doesn't work, you think people are howling with the little problems they have now, once they get reliant on something and then it doesn't work, and we don't have somebody, a contractor, to call and say, fix this, then we got problems. I like the idea of having something, a contractor that we can rely on to make something work. So I get your point, but it's nice to have a product too that you can rely on.
And if you have a budget for me or a range, we'll see what we can do within that.
I guess $15,000 to $70,000.
Annually? Okay.
If you're to get this software that you're talking about, is there any other sections of current software that we're using that would be able to be rolled into it? So we would have we'd be switching from something else and have some of the budget from that could be applied towards this new software?
We would eliminate our current system, which is called Transcendent or Ascent. I never do understand why does it have two names, but it has two names. And we use it now for our sanitary, which it was built for. A lot of places in the state use it for the sanitary, but it doesn't go online with the applications. And we use it for our conditional uses and our variances and our land use permits. It does not work at all for our majors or minors. We've tried, and it works very, very poorly for violations. And the other three that we use it for, it's not great. It wouldn't show status like you're suggesting. This new one, they said that would be every question we asked, either they could do it or they're coming out with it soon, it's under development. Because one of the things they do is nothing costs anything extra. At that price, you get every development improvement they do included.
That's what Oracle said way back when.
But if you look at it from a standpoint too, how much time would that alleviate with a department that you're already having, you have fewer people than you need? Would it save you the time that you need to get other things done?
Yeah, if you look at it from the standpoint that I've asked for a few years for more staff, then, it's probably, depending on what level you would give me, an entry level would be able to do less than a more professional, but including benefits, that's probably 100,000 a year is what a staff person's worth, and that could easily be worth that. One of the things it would move us to is even more online applications. We might even make it mandatory, because we're not going to want to re-enter those. And right now, we allow online applications, but we get very few of them. So, because all it is a fillable PDF.
Well, and if you had online applications, you'd be able to send through this system. It sounds like you'd be able to like have it send a notification to an email that you don't have to manually enter, saying, hey, you're missing this thing. You have 14 business days to get it to us, or whatever it is.
But if you're asking me to cut a staff member in order to pay for this, no, okay? But if you're asking me to stop asking for a staff member, I might be able to, I probably can do that. But you see where I just don't have the money. I don't have that in my budget, so.
I think we need to perhaps, I'm looking at this, staffing and information being the software. The person who gets the license to do POUTs is in great demand. I know people who work in other counties, and I know that they're also scrambling for these people who do POUTs. And so once they're licensed, they're a real commodity. So I think we need to ask the administrator for two things. We need to ask for this software, and we need to ask to pay a premium to this person that gets licensed to do POUTs. Not add a person necessarily, but once they're licensed, then we need to give them a bump. We need to move them up on the I don't know what language to use here, but we need to figure out a way to give them some kind of a premium.
Move them up on the standard scale, on the pay scale.
Right, and I'm not sure exactly how to say that, because there's two different ways of doing it. So, and what would be the most effective way of doing that? I'd have to talk to Human Resources and find the right way to say that. That's the first thing. The second thing is maybe we should go back out into the community, talk to the contractors, talk to the general contractors, talk to the business owners, you know, and ask them if they would see value in what we're suggesting. You know, talk to the plumbers, see if they see a value in it before we invest that kind of money, and then come back and give counsel before we actually take the big bite. And then maybe we can ask the contractor if they would give us a, if we could have a trial. If we try it out.
I did not get the impression because remember, it costs a lot to build that system, transfer all our data into it. That's not really the kind of thing that happens with this kind of software. And of course, we do charge fees, and we could sit down and try to figure out how much we'd have to increase fees to get to 100,000 a year. That's a lot. I think someone in the room just about had a heart attack. And I'm sure it wouldn't be 100,000. We're probably only talking 60,000 a year. So.
Well, that's not going to be popular. Let's.
I would just, to illustrate Dan's point, we filled 3 positions in Mike's division, which handles all this summer. Okay, one person out of all the people we interviewed and applied already had their POUTS licenses. That person's requested salary, and I asked how firm is your salary, was above the maximum I'm allowed to offer. So we didn't hire that person, didn't even make an offer because it wasn't going to work. Because I talked to him and he wasn't that desperate to move up here from where I lived. So every single person we hired, and I think they're going to all be fabulous. They're all very talented. They're all very eager. We've hired some amazing young men. Not that we only hire young men, but that's just who they happen to be. But every one of them has to get their POUTS license and their soil tester license. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the only other side is those big years in the early 2000s that Ellen mentioned. Well, guess what? Those systems between now and 2030 maybe, those systems are going to age out and have to be replaced or refurbished, and there's going to be a heck of a lot of work on the county's part as that's happening. Now, granted, not all at once, but the more systems we permit, new systems we permit in the rural area, and we're permitting a lot of them, they all need attention from time to time. And that involves a certain amount of work as well. So it's a big responsibility for the county. And it's important that we handle it properly. And we sure hear from our constituents if we don't.
I know a supervisor at another county that actually floated the idea, and I can't see how this would even be practical, hiring an engineering company to go out and inspect pallets and charging the way airports charge to bypass security. You get pre-approved for a huge, enormous fee. And if, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Could you be the contractor that pays 5 times as much just to bypass the system? I can't imagine, and have an engineer come out and just look at it and sign off on it. It would be ridiculous, but I don't know. I don't know. Maybe somebody would be willing to pay for that. It's not something I'm interested in talking about, but they're talking about it.
Well, it was in the strategic plan for us to try to contract to improve enforcement. And I think there might have been a different perspective in some of the board members' minds that wrote that down in the strategic plan, but we've taken it to heart, and we've contracted, as it says in our handout at the bottom of it, that we contracted with a former employee, and he has been doing our soil reviews, and he's doing some of our permit review, as much as he can with his new position that he's taken on when he left us. And we've also shifted our stormwater reviews to a private company, and we're going to pass that cost along in our new, as I described, with our new fee schedule. So, and we have another person we contract with on a more sporadic basis. So I'm just saying, we will continue to do that. I tried to find a contractor to do sanitary, because back in those years prior to the peak, before the recession, we did contract first, and in each case, within a year, the county board authorized hiring the person full-time, because the contracting rate was so much. And we did that twice back in the early 2000s. So I'm not saying that'll happen this time. We're not there yet, but when you're at 600, it starts to happen.
All right. I would ask for comments, but we're at 5 o'clock, and I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Is everybody satisfied with what we've been able to accomplish here? Good. I'm glad that you came. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I got something for you. 1 second, Kim. Don't leave. Thank you. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.